What about napping? Because I have friends that somehow manage to nap everywhere and anywhere in any situation, whether it's noisy around them or not. They are absolutely fine with just falling asleep right then and there. I've never been able to do that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's debatable, right? Because it's a little bit down to, so if you're someone who can literally put your head on the ground and fall asleep, I would say that it's a sign of sleep deprivation, right? That your body's like seeking the opportunity at every given opportunity, which means that there's a deficit, like you're lacking. So the body's craving it. It's a little bit like, if you don't sleep, what we see is also that it affects your appetite. And if you're sleep deprived, like you just told me that you are today, and if I took you into a brain scanner and I showed you pictures of, I don't know, broccoli versus chocolate, your brain would just like buzz up when I showed you the chocolate, because you're lacking energy and your brain will go for the energy. So with napping, it's a little bit the same. If you create an opportunity for the body to relax and fall asleep, if you're in a deficit, it will try to fall asleep. It will seek the sleep. Napping can be exceptionally powerful, especially cognitively, if you know how to do it in the right way. And I usually say it's a little bit like the quick program on a dishwasher, right? You can do like the full program. We want that to happen at night, but you can also do like the quick program in the middle of the day, where you literally just like cognitively clean up and you bring energy back into the system. The thing is that you need to be quite good at timing when you do it and how long you do it for. Because if you wake up in the middle of a sleep cycle, which would be like the 90 minutes, you will feel more like knackered after than actually before the nap. But if you sleep, and scientifically I'm supposed to say, like, if you sleep now between or below 26 minutes, the body will not start to descend into the deeper sleep phases, and you will wake up refreshed. I'm not that rigid, so I usually try to say to people, like, just try to keep it around 25 minutes. Set an alarm. Don't debate with yourself. When the alarm goes off, like, you don't snooze, you literally get up. It's non-negotiable. And then the first couple of times where you do like a shorter nap, it feels like I hit you in the head with a hammer. Like, honestly, you won't necessarily like it. But when you train, because sleep is a little bit like going to the gym. The first time you go to the gym, you don't necessarily build muscle just because you lift something, right? But when you repeat and when you're consistent, the system will follow along. And sleep is all about hormones and all about like mental attitude as well. So the more you train and the more you create patterns in your system, the more you will also see a positive output.
Now, one of the things that you've got on your list is light, which I think is really interesting, because we talked earlier about the circadian rhythm and the caveman, cavewoman thing of, getting up with the dawn and going to bed with the dusk. And that absolutely makes perfect sense. Funnily enough, when you're raising children, the commonly held belief, or maybe misbelief, is that, a night light on will soothe them and get them to sleep nicely and this, that, and the other. I have found that is always a disaster if I don't remember to switch it off at some point during the night. But from reading up about the stuff that you've been talking about, is there something more behind that? It feels like actually it's their version of a blue light that's just a total disaster for just consistency of sleep, to have that light on permanently.
The disaster is that, again, you have to remember, like, if you go back millions of years in history, like, a lot of things didn't really evolve in our system, but the world around us evolved. So we are exposed to a lot more light today than we were going back in time. And where light becomes disastrous is if we're exposed to it at the wrong time compared to that existent old circadian rhythm that actually lives in our system. So a good example would be, if I take high level sports. So let's take a football player who returns back from a late night match. A disaster would be that he turns like on all the spots in the ceiling and he continues to get that light exposure, because if he does the opposite and only turns on indirect light, that lumi, like the sensitivity of the light intensity, will signal to him that he needs, or the body needs to start to shut down. If we continue like 24/7 all the time to have like very high light exposure, the brain gets confused. And when we have a very high light exposure, in a very simplified way, what happens is that the body continues to produce energy hormone. So let's say that we expose our kids to high light exposure like all the time, and especially just before they go to bed. It's a little bit like putting heavy metal into their ears when you want them to relax, because the body gets confused about what to do when, which means that they will most likely produce less of the sleep hormone and more of the energy hormone. So yes, light has a major impact.
What about
and I'm sure that there are some light architects that would agree, see a very big business in this. But definitely today, like if you go into very advanced hotels or hospital facilities, you can really manipulate with light. I did a few years back a quite interesting study with a hospital ward where we were manipulating the light to see if we could get doctors and nurses who were leaving a night shift to sleep better if we manipulated the light, so that rather than them leaving the night shift with the light being intensified, what we did during the night shift was actually to decrease the intensity of the light, so that when they left the ward, it was a little bit like nighttime for them and they were wearing sunglasses. And we could see that the sleep latency, the time they spent to fall asleep, actually reduced, and they slept longer and the quality of the sleep came better.
Wow. Climate and sleep hygiene. I was reading up about this and thought this is rather amusing, but at the same time would resonate with people. You know, where temperature is concerned, and I completely get this, sort of opening a window before bed and just having that sort of fresh air breathe through, and making sure it's just not too hot in your sleeping environment. I think we sort of all probably know that's what we should be doing. But even it comes down, especially with you and your work with elite footballers, to what you're wearing in bed. So sleeping naked or sleeping in cotton or sleeping in bamboo, or what is the best thing you can do for yourself in terms of what you wear in bed? Should you wear clothes or not?
It's a little bit of a difficult one, to be honest. I'm a quite firm believer in wearing a textile which supports thermoregulation, which means that it supports your development of temperature throughout the night. So when we sleep during the night, the temperature will have a tendency to actually go a bit up and down. Some women, especially people like women in the menopause, and not to neglect the men because they have it a lot as well, they will have some quite significant spikes on their temperature. And then you will not necessarily feel it as you waking up, but your body is waking up and you start to toss and turn when it becomes too warm, which is fragmenting your sleep. So you might wake up the next day feeling like, ooh, I'm not really energized. In theory, it's because you've been tossing and turning to try to find a spot where your body was not overheating. So a little bit like we are investing a lot of money in dry fit material when we're doing sports, because we want that sweat to be taken away from our body. And we are not, like, no one today would be training in a cotton t-shirt, because we know that it's quite uncomfortable long-term because it becomes wet and it becomes heavy. So I usually say, so why would you sleep in it? Right? We invest a lot of, and this is going back to the investment in sleep, because we invest a lot of money in our like measurable performance, what we can see. And people tend to forget to invest just as much in the sleep and recovery, which is a precondition for them to be able to perform the next day. So I did a study some years back as well, also in a football club. And we literally just took the squad, divided them into two, and we asked half of them just to wear whatever they usually would wear. And then we asked, and this is a long time ago, we just asked them to wear like dry fit material. And what we could see is that the ones sleeping in a dry fit material that could support the regulation of the temperature slept significantly better than the ones sleeping naked or in a dry fit material. It's not only what you sleep in, but it's also your duvet. It's also what you put around your duvet. And for me, it's a little bit about getting people to understand that is an investment area as well. You can have like crazy expensive running shoes, and then you have a crappy pillow from somewhere. Or you can have like, again, the most advanced tracking system, but then you're sleeping with a duvet and your temperature in the bedroom is 24 degrees. And basically you're not harvesting the opportunity of performance enhancement because you're not recovering well. Because we have to remember, so during sleep, one thing is that we go through these different sleep phases, but it's also during sleep that you create the hormones that rebuild the body. So your growth hormone, your testosterone, everything which is rebuilding muscle. When we train, we basically destroy the muscle so that they can rebuild and become stronger. So if we don't sleep well, what happens is actually that process is also minimized. So you should invest just as much in your recovery and sleep as you're actually investing in your performance. I'm like overselling my topic here, but it's actually true.
No, it goes back to reprioritizing and putting sleep as a fundamental part of that whole journey. Finally, about the emotional piece, because that's the other point here, that you mentioned briefly earlier about this as well, this sort of anxiety bit. What I wanted to ask you was, are you a fan or not a fan of sleep tracking devices? Because I've heard so many people talk about them in positive lights, and so many people also say, actually, it just gave me even more reason to stress out about my lack or my belief that I wasn't getting the best possible quality sleep.
I'm a believer and a fan if the tracking device is used in the right way. I'm absolutely not a believer in the tracking device being the solution, but I'm a believer in the tracking device being used in a sensible way, being a part of a motivation that can place you somewhere on a journey. Um, Again, I'm very often working in environments where we're like talking about margins, and in those cases, I'm not always a super fan of the trackers and the wearable devices, because it can stress it tremendously if you see that your data is not where you want them to be. At the same time, I'm working with it with a little bit of a different angle, because I want to build up resilience in the sense that, look, when we are in elite sports, we can't expect that our data will always be green. So I actually want to have coping mechanisms so that we can make ourselves believe that we can actually deliver, even though we still see red data. So I'm not always using the tracking device in the sense that the private person would use it, because let's be honest, or your case for that matter, you've had a few days where you didn't sleep because of kids. That doesn't mean that you can't survive from now on. It means that you need to have like a toolbox in your backpack of stuff that you know, okay, I slept poorly, so what do I do today to support myself in the best way? Okay, you need to be sufficient around hydration. You need to be a little bit smarter about getting the daylight so that you prepare the next night to be a little bit better than the night before. So I do believe that tracking devices can be extremely good to kind of support education as well, so that when we are applying interventions, we can see if they have an effect or not. And I'm a strong believer in not a one size fits all, because again, going back to the emotional part, you might react to something in one way, and then I'm working with someone and they might react to something in a different way. Be sensible. I think that's my message around the tracking device, especially also because the quality of the data that you get can vary a lot, which means that you might have a really, really big, significant, how can you say, deficit in your data. You might wear something and it tells you, well, you slept like really poorly, and in reality, you actually slept better. So what do you believe, the poor data or the feeling that it's actually left in your body? Because quite often we can also be persuaded into believing, oh, I feel like crap because the data told me that now I'm supposed to feel like crap. So when I'm working with devices, I have a tendency to actually get to a point where I ask the people that I work with to take them off.
Wow. What point is that in the sleep assessment? Straight away?
No, not necessarily, but so when the beauty of my job and where I feel quite privileged is that I get to work with people quite long term, which means that I also get to see fluctuation. It can be in elite sports like competition season, off season, injury period, you name it. And it depends on the personality. But if I see anyone start to obsess around the data, that's absolutely a breaking point for me to take away the device, because we don't want the obsession. We want to create a sustainable solution. We want to motivate, but we don't want to create any level of like fanatic attitude towards sleep as well, because that can really backfire over time.
What is the one thing that you've learned more than anything else in all the years you've been assessing various different elite people in their worlds where sleep's concerned?
I love it. I really love the question. I think that it's people like me who come from a quite boxed thinking scientific world, we need to be extremely good advocates of translating our knowledge into different environments, and us having the respect that our science might say A, but we are the ones who are responsible of translating that in the correct way into that environment that we are going into. Because there's a tremendously big difference between working with an extreme sport guy. I did a project a few years back with an extreme sport guy who's doing, like, he did something called Yukon Arctic Circle Race, which is like 400 miles across ice. He runs with a gun and he brings his own supply. There would be like ice, but like everything works against sleep. And in his case, it's all about like optimizing these very small windows of sleep that he's allowed to get. So I need to adapt my knowledge to his challenge. So when I go into one environment, that's my role. That we can't apply a one size fits all model around sleep, because environments are extremely different. And you asked about the emotional environment, and the emotional state of an environment plays a major role in sleep as well. So I think the biggest learning is adaptation in order to create success.
And finally, a performance tip for everyday people. So with everything that you have learned from elite sport, what can regular people take into their lives every single day that will give them a better shot at a better night's sleep? What's the one thing that you would tell them to do on a daily basis?
To be honest, if you went on Google, right, and you Google like the 5 best tips around sleep, I think tip number 1 would still be like create sleep regularity, which is bollocks in elite sports, right? Because quite often you won't have a frequent schedule. So if you have the opportunity, and I understand why Google would put that on top of the list, because that creates predictability in your system and it makes it a lot easier for your hormones. If you have an opportunity to create some sustainable scheduling around your sleep, that would be my tip number 1. The second one is don't underestimate the effect of sleep hygiene. Today, we live in extremely modern housing. We live in very isolated houses. And a lot of people, like in Germany, the latest statistic that came out was that 37% of the population, they sleep in 2 warm bedrooms. So they don't have a sleeping problem, but they are creating a sleeping problem because of the environment that they're sleeping in. So sleep hygiene, making sure that sleep hygiene is not only the temperature in the bedroom. Sleep hygiene is also that you allow your body to prepare to go into the sleep phase. So if I asked you, I'm hoping you would say yes, but you brush your teeth every night, right? Because it gives you a pleasant feeling, and you've done it always. Like, don't negotiate it. Just make sure you hydrate well, because you're creating opportunity every time you have these small toothbrushes. And I think the third one would be, remember to apply what you would apply around a car. Like when you throughout the day, it's absolutely okay that you drive with 200 kilometers an hour on the highway, but none of you guys listening in, or you for that matter, would try to park your car with the same speed, right? You would remove the foot from the speeder to make sure that you can, in a very secure way, get your car into the booth. Today, people tend to forget that the body needs that we remove the foot from the speeder so that we pace down before we go to bed. We expect that we can just like run with 200 kilometers per hour, hit the pillow and then fall asleep, and the body was not built to do that. So that's an advice as well.
I have absolutely loved this conversation, Anna. It's been so interesting, and you've confirmed a bunch of stuff to me, which is good to hear again, because it just reiterates what you already know, but it's said in such a powerful way. But also I've learnt loads, so thank you so much. It's been really interesting.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.